Hey, welcome to Jazz Thoughts. I'm Andrew, I'm a jazz guy, and I love jazz. I love to play jazz, listen to jazz, think about jazz, read about jazz. So here's a YouTube channel where I hang out and talk about jazz. So today let's talk about Larry Young's 1966 album Unity. This album is one of my favorites because it basically takes the idea of B3 organ jazz and brings it into the modern jazz world. So the B3 organ started in churches originally as a cheaper and more portable version of the pipe organ, but really quickly became popular among jazz musicians. Typically, the organ is used in soul jazz, like recordings by Jimmy Smith or guitarist Grant Green. It's referred to as a earthy or soulful sound. Unity is not that. It's a very new, original 1960s sound referred to as post-bop, very influenced by the John Coltrane Quartet. And in fact, Elvin Jones, John Coltrane's drummer, plays on this record, along with Joe Henderson, the sax player, and Woody Shaw, trumpet player. So today, let's talk about the tune If. If is a blues written by Joe Henderson. So when I say If is a blues, I'm referring to one of the most common, if not the single most common form for a tune in jazz, a form being basically the backbone, or Wayne Shorter calls it the DNA for a composition that is initially played and then repeated as a basic structure for solos, for improvisations. So the blues originated with African American work song, but developed into its own genre that was actually performed for listeners. So specifically in jazz, a blues form is usually 12 bars long and has a specific chord progression with some variations from tune to tune. But If is a very advanced version of this. It's basically taken as far from the origins of blues as possible while still being somewhat recognizable as a song form. The chords of the head are replaced with much more colorful chords, a much more colorful tonal palette it is called. Also, the melody is phrased so that it disguises the chord changes and typical form of the blues in a number of ways, but specifically by a technique called going across the bar line, which I will talk about in a little bit. The solos essentially follow a blues form, but take liberties with the chords and rhythms. To keep this video on the shorter side, let's just stick with the head and the first part of Joe's solo, and I will do a part 2 so we can talk about the rest of Joe's solo and the trumpet solo. So let's start with the head. A few things to listen for. I love the way this tune opens. I think the first notes are a great way to introduce the sound. Kind of sounds like a fanfare, the way, they would introduce like a king in the Middle Ages, especially with the trumpet sound. This also comes from the use of wider intervals, which is a common theme in jazz, especially later on. So let's try an experiment. We're going to count groups of 4 so we can get a feel and an ear for what Joe is doing with the blues form that's really interesting. Anyone can do this, not just musicians, but don't feel bad if it's hard for you right away. So I'll demonstrate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4, 9, 2, 3, 4, 10, 2, 3, 4, 11, 2, 3, 4, 12, 2, 3, 4. Counting this way actually feels super unnatural. Even for me, that's really hard to do. And that's because of these across the bar line phrases. So the melody in the second bar emphasizes beat 2 and then continues in rhythmic groups of 3. So, counting instead of groups of 4, like when you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And then it resolves in a very unexpected way while still managing to sound natural, unless you're counting along, that is. Then it almost feels like a rug is pulled out from under you, or like you're missing a step. So what does that all mean? It's a great way of showing how jazz musicians in the 1960s were really trying to get as far outside of jazz traditions as they possibly could, while still using them in their compositions and improvisations. Also listen for Larry Young's rolling bass pedal tones. The name actually originated in classical music and comes from the fact that these tones would be played on the organ foot pedals. On drums, you can hear Elvin Jones' ride cymbal patterns really locking in with both the pedal tones and the melody and kind of providing a glue to hold them together. He also fills in the spaces very tastefully with the toms, the snare, and cymbal crashes. So the head is repeated once, and then we're into Joe's solo. So he starts off lower in pitch in the range of his horn. He's definitely taking a quick pace right away, but leaving himself somewhere to go. You can really hear that he borrows from the blues language, using what are called blue notes in a really interesting way to superimpose major and minor tonalities over a longer series of chord changes. A quick word on blue notes. It's a very bluesy and soulful sound. Comes from the blues scale, which has been used pretty much from the beginning of jazz music. So basically, Joe is taking a very old sound, a very traditional common practice in jazz music, turning it inside out and bringing it into the 1960s, the next era of jazz. There are some other interesting things going on here. So the first couple of notes in Joe's solo work in groups of sixes instead of fours, basically superimposed over our expectation of 4-beat long rhythms. And we can really feel this if we count along. So Joe continues this pattern of 6-beat long ideas to land us finally on beat 3 of the 11th bar into his solo. Again, super weird, because we'd usually expect to land on the first beat of 4 beats or 4 bars, something like that. So Joe lands us super weirdly on beat 3 of the 11th bar, and then Elvin plays a little snare roll and cymbal crash and launches us into the next chorus. Finally giving us the resolution that we've been waiting for this whole time, with his little cymbal crash and a little bass drum kick on the first beat of the first bar of the next chorus. Finally, you can listen to Larry Young's bass line as he descends from beat 2 of bar 11, and you'll have to do some counting to really pick this out. It's probably okay to just listen to the bass line itself without counting through the entire form. You can really feel a sense of falling and landing somewhere, getting us ready for the next chorus and the next level of energy and intensity. That's all I have for today. Thanks for watching. This has been Jazz Thoughts with me, Andrew Clarkson. Tune in for part 2, where I look at the next part of Joe's solo on the song If on Larry Young's 1966 album Unity. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe if you feel like you learned something or just enjoyed what you heard and saw. Bye.